Welcome to Leadership Trademarked, the podcast where we explore what it truly means to lead in today's uncertain world. Built on decades of experience across industries, we go beyond theory to examine the real tools, challenges, and outcomes that define leadership today. In Season 1, we laid the foundation, bringing together voices from across sectors to uncover the core principles of effective leadership. Now in Season 2, we turn our attention to the existential challenges organizations face: uncertainty, rapid technology changes, and shifting generational expectations. We kick off the season with founding members Leslie Riley and Rosalind Kingsmill, sharing over 80 years of senior leadership experience, and myself, Sylvia Fraser, a leader driving inclusion and innovation in municipal government and public service. Supporting us behind the scenes is Finley Gain, whose tech expertise ensures our conversations reach you smoothly and professionally. So join us as we unpack real-world leadership with insight, purpose, and actionable strategies, helping you define and refine your own leadership trademark.
Welcome, everybody. So glad you're tuning in as we move into Season 2 of Leadership Trademarked. We are now diving deeper into the who is the leader, or who are you as a leader. We are definitely dealing with a number of existential challenges. Now, it's everywhere. It's in businesses, governments, education. All organizations are facing these challenges, and there has been a lot of fear and confusion created. The certainty seems to have disappeared. Now, I'm someone who grew up in a world of change as we went from paper to electronics, but I also grew up in a world of certainty. That I could do this, that we would do this, that it would work. So, as we move forward, we are going to continue the sort of themes in Season 2 that are very important for us all to be able to be in partnership and connected, not just to the other, but also to ourselves. And one of the fundamental approaches to that, which I've been using for 30 years, is that we look at who we are. I call it the identity matrix for self-concept. And we're going to talk more about this, and we're going to give you an example, and we're going to give you the process. So welcome, everybody, and here we go. So as we step forward now into this, welcome Leslie Riley. Leslie and I have been partners in crime, or co-workers, or equal consultants, or bosses and followers with each other for more than, great to say this, Leslie, more than 40 years. We have different strengths. We are different people, but we share the same core values. So Leslie, over to you. I'd like to introduce you now. Actually, I invite you to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Roz. One of the things that Roz and I put together, leadership development workshop. It was a series of workshops working with new, emerging, and experienced leaders. And one of the things we started to realize was that the difference between being successful as a leader and struggling with that role is having a clear understanding of who you are and what you stand for, what your limitations are, what your strengths are, and what your boundaries are. And so as we developed the workshop, we said, okay, the first fundamental part of knowing who you are as a leader is to understand what you bring to the table. What are your strengths? What do you really bring to the table? Try to forget about what you're not good at, because you're probably not good at it for a very specific reason. Let's really focus on those strengths. And so one of those strengths was who are you? And we've used the identity matrix as a very powerful framework for understanding who you are as a leader and what your strengths are. Years ago, a friend of mine was in the position of having to let go large numbers of his staff. It was in today's environment, it would be an AI robotic situation. In this case, it was a switch to computerized digitization of an entire group. And over the years, he was a wonderful leader. He was compassionate. He treated everybody on his staff like they were a member of the family. He knew who everybody's birthdays were, who everybody's the names of all their kids and all of that. And one by one, he had to let go of probably 40 or 50 people out of a group of 70. And it killed him because it went against his principles of being honest with people and being straightforward with people. And once he held on to that idea that his principle was honesty and straightforwardness, he was able to go. He still had to go through and let all of these people go, but he did it in a way that allowed them dignity. It gave them, he insisted on compensation for them that allowed them to bridge that time without a job. And he did it one-on-one. He didn't send out letters. He brought everybody into his office one by one, and he explained to them what was happening and why, and the timeline and what they would get. And so his identity was to be a true leader that allowed people to have hope and stability and trust. And the only way he could do that was to give them a bridge from losing this job into what they were going to do next. So we've been talking a bit about something called the identity matrix, and it's a framework for helping all of us to identify what these core parts of our identity and our strengths are. And the beauty is in its simplicity, and the difficult part is in the interpretation. So Roz is an excellent interpreter. The framework itself is really it is actually a matrix. It's a 3x2 matrix, and it is divided into characteristics that I want to be known for and characteristics that I don't want to be, and things that I am, could become, or am not. And a guide takes you. You could even do it on your own. You can just create a box and write little things in. I'm going to turn it over to Roz now, because she's going to take me through this exercise of the identity matrix.
Okay. So, Leslie, our seatbelt on, ready to go?
I'm ready.
I'm going to walk you through an exercise, and your job is to hear the question and then answer the question. The identity matrix is a process, an approach, an inquiry for all of us to understand the question we often ask ourselves, sometimes in the shower, sometimes on a walk: who am I? It is the most profound question of all our lives. And if you don't know who you are, then do you know anything else for sure? Probably not. So if you do not even know who you are, will you be capable of knowing who someone else is or something else is? And once you know who you are, it is a big joke, because the only consolation is that the majority of population is actually with you. So the first thing to do with your life is to know the nature of your existence. In other words, the question, who am I? That little voice screaming in your body and your mind. And if you just remove all the surface nonsense, it's screaming within you also to know what the answer is. So I would like to take you through a conversation where I will invite you to answer some questions designed to help you answer the question, who am I?
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. So there's two parts to this, Leslie. We're all pretty good at saying, I know what I want to be. And we all have a pretty good idea about who we don't want to be, but it's vague. So let's start with what you want to be.
Okay.
Over to you.
Okay. So at my core, I believe that I am a relationship person, a relater. I think that I bond with people very quickly,
Mhm.
and that relationship becomes more important to me over time.
Tell me more about the core.
Um, I think at the core of me, I'm looking for connections between myself and others and among a larger group. And I could even extend that to finding connectedness and relationship among concepts or things. I just think that I'm kind of a linkage kind of thing. I think that's who I am. And it's funny, we were talking about this earlier and how these kinds of things change with you over time. If you had asked me this question when I was right out of school, I probably would have said, I'm smart and I'm motivated and blah 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 and who cares, right? I realize now that all of those things are table stakes, and so that the core of myself is this role as a relator, as a relationship building, find the connectedness kind of.
Okay, perfect. So, with that at your core, then what would you say your potential is?
I think my potential as a leader is to guide others to finding their best self, or finding and creating and pulling together a good solution, and doing that on the basis of input from many sources, many people, tying all that stuff together and making the sum of the parts better than the one part.
So, if I were to summarize it, I would say that as you do know that you're a relator person, then the potential you have is to take that talent and use it with a team, with an organization, with a family. Am I understanding that?
I think that's a good way to summarize it. Yeah, I like that.
Okay. Okay. So then the next question is, so what's the limit? At what point is the core of you and the potential of you not going to be achievable, or what is the limit?
So this is what I want to be, but I'm not, right?
Well, this is what you want to be. And at your core, you can describe that and you can see you have the potential. But the limit to what you want to be is another story. So,
I think the limit for me is that I mean, from the outside, it probably seems that maybe I run hot and cold, or I'm a little inconsistent. I think what that is that I can get easily bored and inattentive.
really?
Okay, Roz is laughing because there are times when in the middle of a conversation, she'll say, Leslie, this is really important. Are you listening? So there you go.
Okay, so that's great, Les, because what I'm hearing you say, let me feed it back, is that you want to be a person who can relate to people kindly, engage them, talk about important things, and do it with openness and compassion and trust. And you have the potential for that because at your core, I'm hearing you say that those are your principles, your values, that you're a kind person. At the same time, there is a limit to this. So you may want to be a great business leader, but you don't want to be the prime minister.
That's a good way to put it.
Right?
That's a
You
really
may
good way.
be a great senior executive leader, but you don't want to be the CEO.
Right. Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's clear. Now,
Right.
when you know that, as we've talked about it, then the next question is, so not what you want to be, because I think you're pretty clear on that. I'm clear that you're clear. Are you clear?
I'm clear.
Okay. So now I want to talk about what you don't want to be.
I also don't want to be a dictator or be controlling. And I don't think I am.
Well, after 40 years, I can tell you, you aren't.
Okay. All right. Well, there you go.
However, that's a very interesting thing you've said, because while you do not want to be a dictator or top down, you do have a boundary. You have a boundary where what I want to be and what I'm doing and what I don't want to be, but there's a point at which enough's enough, or it's your boundary.
Right.
Can you talk about that?
I think that boundary comes from the point of view is I don't want to be in charge of another person's life, right? I want to stand next to that person.
Okay.
I want it to be, I prefer a collegial type relationship and not, like I said, I don't really want to be, because I don't have any control over that. I can't really do that.
Okay. And I'm putting words in your mouth now, but I'm assuming that that boundary gets set from the principles that you have at your core.
Yes, because I do actually believe that people can and have a right to be their own person and
Okay.
make their own decisions. I
Okay.
fundamentally believe that.
Right. It doesn't mean you have to like them.
I don't have to like them.
No.
No.
Okay. So if you would go further down this rabbit hole, so we know you don't want to be a dictator and you know you don't want to rescue people or tell them what to do. What would you say your weakness or your defect is, if you had one? I don't think you do.
Oh, aren't you sweet? Well, no, I think self-righteousness, the potential to be self-righteous is there she goes laughing at me again. Is a real it's a pitfall for me. And I know that that can be very intimidating. It can even be interpreted as being maybe somewhat of a bully. I mean,
Mhm.
I don't think I am a bully, but I would say I am probably self-righteous. I I know what I want. I feel that I'm right, you know.
So would you say that that defect, in fact, comes from uh, the opposite of what your core is, that it comes from the opposite of what your potential is? So that in a situation, you could come across as imperialist or know it all,
It
or
could. I think I could. I mean, I think I probably have. I think it also comes from a self-assuredness that goes too far or is presented in a less than ideal. I mean, it's okay to be self-assured. It's unnecessary to be self-righteous. And I probably
okay.
crossed the line there.
Okay, well, that's excellent because, when we speak to anybody about anything, one to one or in a team or in a big auditorium, we have the opportunity to influence people by our voice. There is a thing that I call unreasonable self confidence, and it comes across in people's voice, it comes across in their tone. It goes further than that. It comes across in their face. It comes across in their fate, in their pace. Now, on first blush, you can think, wow, look at that person, yada, yada, yada. Great stuff. But after about 5 minutes, I want to shake them because they are not demonstrating to me that, unlike what you've said, Leslie, at their core, they actually care about anybody else. They are not demonstrating to me that they've ever considered that there might be a potential or that there's a limit or that there's a boundary. And I think the word self righteous is a perfect example of how that can land because it's not a really mean word, but it's sort of a word that the language, there's more to it than that. And I would recoil. Okay.
Exactly. And a person who demonstrates a sense of self-righteousness tends to get the eye rolling in response or the, oh, there she goes again. And of course, then everybody stops listening, stops cooperating, stops collaborating. It's a door shutter for sure.
So this one goes a bit deeper, dear,
Okay.
but we're
I'm ready.
going there because I know for myself and I believe for everybody, that we also have to look at our shadow. And the shadow is a description of how the sun hits us when it's not straight above. It's coming at an angle. And then there's that long shadow. So what would you say your shadow is? If we're in the I don't want to be my shadow, I don't want to be my defect, I don't want to have to use my boundary, but I know what it is and I'm not going over it. So what would you call your shadow with everything else you've said?
Okay, so within that, I don't know.
And I know you really well, so you can't hide from me.
All right.
Okay.
I'm in my shadow, so maybe I don't know if this is the right word. I'm going to call it standoffish. I don't want to be that person that stands back and says, not my problem, not my thing. And I think it comes from four different things. I think I'm slow to trust. I don't know if that comes from a level of suspiciousness or untrusting, but I am slow to trust. So while I'll give a new person the benefit of the doubt, that trust has to build over time,
Yep.
which I don't see as a problem or a limitation. I think it becomes a problem when it's laced with suspicion and lack of trusting.
Okay.
The other side of it could actually be that I am fairly quick to feel bored and inattentive. I sometimes think I have the attention span of a fruit fly. And I think that also kind of feeds into that standoffishness. So those are kind of the two sources.
All right. So let me give you feedback on that. I hear
Okay.
you. I hear
Okay.
you. And I want to just underline and, high five to you that you're talking about how you feel, not just how you think. So perhaps we could say that if you are, for one reason or other, no shame, no blame, operating from your shadow, you could be guarded.
Right.
You could be overly empathetic and start to feel like you're going to get swallowed.
Okay.
Or for whatever reason, you could be hypersensitive. And so when you are thinking about who you are, the shadow is kind of exactly the opposite of your core.
Right.
And your defect is the opposite of your potential. And your boundary is the opposite of your limit, in the same way that what you want to be is the opposite of what you don't want to be. However, a lot of us have a sort of felt sense or an intuition of what we don't want to be, but we cannot necessarily articulate it. It's more of a gut feeling. And so we shy away from that, which is kind of silly, because if you don't know why you're in your shadow, then you can't really do very much about what you're feeling there with the sensitivity or being whatever you think you're being, because it could be wrong anyway, Leslie. Like your hypersensitivity could have nothing at all to do with the conversation or the situation in the moment. It may be something that's hardwired in your unconscious, or it's on your mind because you didn't get enough sleep, or you know that you have to da 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 da. So you're sensitive to the information because you're not really present, right?
Right. Right.
And then the other side of it, which I see so often in good leaders, is this overly empathetic part,
Right.
You remember when in the first series, Anthony talked about his staff and how his job was to guide them and develop them.
Right.
And the comment that came back so often was, why are you not punishing me? And he said, well, because I want to know what I did wrong that meant you couldn't do it right. So, yes, he had empathy for them, but he wasn't going to excuse them. And then we all know people that are guarded, and whatever you say to them, they don't answer it. They answer something else, or they're so guarded about their emotions that they, instead of attaching, they detach. Now, they do it very politely, of course, or professionally or sensibly, but it doesn't get you anywhere. But when people are, in fact, in their shadow, and I would say a lot of people are for one reason or another, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but we have to go down the rabbit hole to find out what's creating that.
Yeah. Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does make sense. So, with all of this in mind, what do you think is my next step? What do I do with this? How do I apply all of this to take the next step in my legacy?
Okay. So when you ask that kind of question, what I hear is, okay, so I get myself and I've done this job and I want more and I don't know exactly what it is, but this is too boring. And oh, by the way, I'd like to have a little more money. Okay. Is that close?
Sure.
Okay, so there is no silver bullet to that. As a coach and an advisor and a change leader for many years, one of the things that became very clear to me quite early is that everybody wants something, and that's fair enough. And if they are comfortable enough with their boss or their leader, they will express it. However, if they're not willing to do the work to get it, then nothing's going to happen because, to your point, Leslie, it would make the boss or what you expected to take care of you like a mummy, that you would be over empathetic and just hand them the keys to the palace, right? So, and I run into this all the time with clients who have developed enough of a relationship with me to trust me, and some are doing the work, some aren't. If they're not, they get two shots and they're out because I can't do it for them. And some really dig in and say, you know what? I'm learning. I'm getting it. I understand the concept. Tell me more. Ask me hard questions. So I asked them 5 questions. Okay. So we've yada, 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 yada. We've talked maybe we've done a bunch of discoveries. They know who they are. We've talked maybe 4 or 5 hours. I say, okay, let's go back to go forward. Now, what do you want? Knowing this, that they didn't know when they arrived. It's a really good question to ask. I think as people, we need to ask ourselves that question very seriously every 10 years. Now, you could say 5 or you could say 15, but what somebody wants at 10 years old, they will probably achieve. Now they're 20 and they have to have a new want. What do I want now? And at 30 and 40 and 50 and 60 and 70, okay? Because every 10 years, the whole world shifts. People get married, they get divorced, they move, they have children, the children grow up, they have money, they don't have money. So, it's a refreshing conversation. Okay, so what do you want now? And then the next question is, so what are you willing to do about it? What's the action that you are willing to take? You want to go to school? Do you want some coaching? Are you going to read books? Are you going to go find a new, whatever, whatever? But the important thing is then to say, okay, so if you do all that, how are you going to know that you got what you wanted? How are you going to measure it? Because success takes a while.
Yeah, it does.
And if you don't know what you're driving at and you don't have those goals down, you don't know when you get there. It's like driving in the fog,
Thank you. Thank you, Roz, for listening to me and for accepting what I tell you at face value. That really means a lot. And your interpretation is great. I want to ask you though, one thing that really bothers me is this whole issue of if I were going to go back and change one thing about me, or not maybe change, but sort of deal with it effectively, it's this self-righteousness. Because I know that it slips into bullying really easy. What should I be aware of? What should I start doing tomorrow to kind of, just be
well,
tamp it down, but be aware of it?
yeah. Okay. So, I mean, the first thing, Leslie, is to see if you can reflect a bit. Take a half an hour every morning or something and think about, where did I feel myself slipping into self-righteousness. Now, what I notice about myself and other people is that they've slipped right into that. In fact, they don't slip, they jump into it when they interrupt, when they don't share their feelings. And it's a fear response, right? I'm right because I'm afraid of being wrong. I'm right because that's how I think and I'm terrified of feeling. Okay. So, that's a puzzle to unravel. But if you work with yourself around 5 questions, what do I want? What am I willing to do? How am I going to measure it? Here's the big one. What's in my way?
Right.
So I'll stop on that for a moment, because what I discover with myself and others as we go through this stuff is that when they get to the bottom of the rabbit hole, and I can see it pretty quickly, they say, oh my God, that's what I do. And I'm blaming him, her, them. Okay. That's a learning and that's good. So they say, well, what should I do now? And I said, stop it.
Right. Yeah. In fact, Rosie, you're reminding me of a tip that I got from a relationship management course I took years and years ago. It was my first supervisory job in the company that I worked for. They put you into this course. It was relationship management. And honestly, the instructor said something about, and you also mentioned interruptions. So he's saying that if somebody is saying something to you and your immediate reaction is to interrupt and or discount and or disagreement, he said that is when you actually have to stop yourself and think and count to 10, because you really need to hear what this person is saying. And I thought, wow, that's,
Yeah.
So that's kind of a short version of what you've been telling me.
But it's the same dynamic, Leslie. It's the same principle. A couple of years I went down to New York and I joined a workshop. The name of it's very famous. Anyway, I forget it. But there was 100 people. And so each one got a chance to come up and she would guide them through this kind of an inquiry. Okay.
Right.
That's what she would do. So, of course, it started with, well, you tell me about the situation and blah, blah, blah. And so you got to get the background and the context and how they felt and how the other felt. Okay.
Right.
And this person was either terribly distressed, very sad, or incredibly angry. Okay. There was no happy. So after the story came out, she said, so just summarize this other person, whoever it was, the wife, the boyfriend, the boss. And of course, by that time, because they've talked for half an hour, they can pretty much chunk it up into 2 sentences. So they would say, da, 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 da. And of course, it's all judgment. It's all discounting. It's all they're nasty. It's all their fault, right?
Right.
Very well expressed by the client who's had built up to this and knows they're allowed to tell the truth, okay, or tell the truth of their feelings. So the 4th question she would ask them at that point was, okay, I think we're pretty clear on this. And then she'd lean forward and look at the person and say, and how are you that? And the healing happened. Because what was actually going on was a projection onto the other, because they didn't know what they wanted or who they were or where their boundaries were.
Mm-hmm.
There was a missed expectation there in how they thought the marriage or the friendship or the relationship or the job would be. But what they did was say, well, it's your fault.
Right.
And you tricked me. And I do remember that story I told earlier, waking up the 3rd morning after I took that job thinking, I've been conned. And I went back and I studied it and I thought, well, I have been conned. On the other hand, now that I can see what's going on, I can't leave these people.
Right.
Okay. So what do I want? What am I going to do? How am I going to measure it? Well, of course, and we've talked about this through these podcasts, I asked questions. I didn't tell them what to do or how to feel. I said, so, make it simple. And we cleaned the place up in 6 months. We went from the worst performing branch in that financial organization to the best performing branch right across the country. And it, it wasn't me, it was them. But I did listen, and I didn't even know how they did the work they did, right? I didn't know how to spin vaults or do the treasury, I didn't know how to do any of that.
Right.
But somebody in there did. So does that answer?
It does. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. And again, thank you. Thank you for listening and really taking it seriously, listening with purpose. I appreciate that.
Well, you're most welcome. And I've only known you for 40 years, and you've never told me that you tend to be self righteous. But I can also tell you, I've never felt you were.
I guess in summary, what we've tried to do with this podcast is to offer you a framework, or to offer a framework for looking at creating the whole image of yourself with all of its strengths, with all of its boundaries, and with all of its limitations. And by doing this myself, it's more of almost like a refresher for me than a brand new awakening. But it has really going through this process has really helped me reconfirm what will be for my legacy, for example. What will be at the core of that legacy for me is my ability to relate to people. If I want to leave something behind that anybody can use after I'm gone, it will be my ability to relate to people and how that made them feel. And I also realized that my shadow is probably just my shadow, but this whole issue of being intimidating and self-righteous is something that I can deal with that. I can go back to reminding myself to count to 10 every time somebody's saying something that I find particularly irritating, or I want to discount, or, even worse, I want to just interrupt them so that they'll stop talking. So it's that stopping myself and counting to 10. And I think that everybody can take away from this in just 5 minutes, just do three things. Write down on a sheet of paper what you have identified as your core strength. And then write down on that same sheet of paper what that means in terms of your potential and your desired goals for the next, let's say, 2 years. And what are your boundaries? What is the stopping point for you? What will you not do in order to achieve that goal? If you can do those three things, you've probably got a little bit of a plan for dealing with whatever in front of you for the next few.
Just remember that we're all confused, and not many of us want to admit it. And the only way we get through it is to have meaningful conversations with somebody who's different from us, but who respects us. So pick people that you respect and people who respect you and have the conversation. Thank you, Finley. Thank you, Leslie. It's a joy working with you guys.
Yeah, thanks
That's
to
a
both
wrap.
of you.